So how are you?
I'm good. I'm okay. Same as everybody else, really. Feel like I'm in a holding position. I suppose I was lucky that I had all this finished before the lockdown happened.
Yeah.
The record was just about finished and all the artwork was getting done and everything. And then this happened. So if I hadn't got the record into a position that it was finished as it was before lockdown, I probably wouldn't have got it out,
Yeah.
So I'm trying to look on the upside. I was lucky in that respect. But yeah, it's been pretty tough because I've got two young kids and, seeing my kids not being able to go to school and not being able to see their friends and stuff has been pretty tough, I think. That's been the toughest part, I think.
And what does it learn you? I mean, what is happening now? What do you learn from it?
I suppose not to have such a decadent way of thinking, where you think you have all the time in the world. You think, I'll just do it when it feels right, or I'll get round to it. I suppose I have more of a sense of urgency about things now, I suppose. If I've got to fix that gate in our garden, then fix it today. If I'm going to improve, my French and my Welsh speaking, start trying harder.
Yeah.
If kind of that film soundtrack I'm supposed to be doing, do some more homework, get some more sketches done, all those kind of things, really, just work harder, I suppose. It's really kicked in a bit of a work. It's reignited my work ethic a tiny bit, I think.
One question, you are a bit, can you move your camera a bit more down? Because you are, or maybe just sit up. Yeah. Because I have the screen, if you...
I was just leaning down a bit. So
leaning down, yeah. Cool. Well, let's then, you said the work you've done, you had the work done prior to the lockdown and prior to the corona. When were you first aware of Victor Jara? How old were you?
I'd say it was about 15, 16, I think. I remember there was a group called Working Week. They were kind of like a jazz collective from London. They were very fated for a while, and they were very on trend. And I remember them doing a song called La Beceramos, and it was dedicated to Victor Jara. I think that's the first time I remember hearing about Victor Jara. And then I think it was when U2 wrote a song called One Tree Hill that included Victor Jara in it too. Then around about the same time, Street Fighting Years by Simple Minds, they quoted Victor Jara too. They dedicated that record to him. There were lots of other people like David Ewan, who is a politician and a folk singer from Wales. He wrote a song about, David Ewan. Basically, lots of other musicians writing about Victor Jara, is how I discovered him. And that would be around about the mid-80s. And
did you start researching him then?
No, you just find stuff out. You find stuff out in newspapers, little periodical newspaper pieces. I remember watching a film called Missing with Jack Lemmon and Sissy Spacek, and that was about the disappeared in Chile. And I remember reading a newspaper piece about the filming of that film, The Missing, and they mentioned Victor Jara and Joan Jara in that piece. And there was the newspaper piece was quite informative. So you just pick up pieces along the way. You just do. I remember kind of David Ewan talking about Victor Jara, the Welsh politician and singer. So yeah, through that film, Missing, I found out a lot about Victor Jara and Chile's politics in that period in the early 70s through that film as well.
Yeah. What does his life story tell you?
Well, the life story is obvious, is that there was a particular period in South American politics, especially, where the left and right were even more so diametrically opposed to each other than we could ever come to expect, I think, because the way that the left and right opposed each other, in that part of the world at that point in history almost always resulted in somebody dying. Yeah. It resulted in somebody, on either side, to be honest. A lot of really bad things happened in the name of kind of ideology. So everybody know. I think anybody that knows anything about Victor Jara knows how his story ends. They know how he's murdered. They know how the tragedy that envelops that narrative. But I think what it tells me about now is that there's when you have intolerance, a basic, simple intolerance to somebody else's political ideology, if you have an intolerance to the ideology, it really, very rarely ends in anything other than just atrocity or just something which is an anathema to freedom of speech or to liberty or to somebody just living their life. Intolerance to somebody else's ideology, their way of political thinking, their political philosophy, any kind of just pure intolerance towards somebody else's way of thinking in terms of politics, it's just not the way to go. You have to try and understand at least why somebody else has a political ideology rather than just to step to the instinct of just thinking that they're an idiot or that they're wrong. Because I think once you go down the road of thinking that somebody's a complete idiot and they're wrong, then you just follow the road to hatred, I think. I think that's what this proves. And even if I see somebody these days and I disagree with every particle of their political thought, I at least try and understand the fears that led them to believe in the things that they do. I think that's a better way of approaching things.
Yeah, because he was murdered by the Chilean dictatorship in 1973, just for people who don't know the story. But what does it tell you about how important or non-important is it to have an ideology? Is it good to have a really fixed idea of an ideology?
That's a good question. I think it used to be. I'm not so sure it is anymore. Yeah. I think you have broader strokes in political thinking now. You have what you would just call a broader left-leaning libertarian way of thought, but I don't think that particularly connects to public ownership, people owning their sources of water or electricity or steel or mineral wealth. Like in Britain, obviously socialism was connected to the people owning, their means of power, gas, electricity, water. The state owned steel and coal, and we even owned, the means of producing cars to a certain degree. I don't think that having a libertarian way of thinking can really connect to public ownership anymore. I don't think that's ever going to happen. I'd like it to. I'd like some things to remain in public ownership, especially stuff like water and electricity and gas. But I don't think that's ever going to happen. And I think ideology, if it's going to be ideology, if it's going to be pure ideology, connects to either kind of free market economies, which is what we have now, obviously, mm-hmm. or it connects to public ownership. I think public ownership is never going to come back in the Western world. I don't, in a broad sense. There'll be some things that we own, but in a broad sense, I don't think that that kind of socialism is ever going to come back. I don't think.
But do you think then there's now a fixed state that this is the way that history is going to be now, or do you think there will be some sort of mixture with public ownership or not? Or
God, Jesus, I wish you were talking to somebody more intelligent. I think there's a push. There's a push, isn't there, for like what I call the broad libertarian argument, whether it be about reparations to the past, to how people have been brutalized in the past on the basis of their race, on the basis of their ethnic origins. There's a push to try and redress that balance and definitely to have almost a reparative philosophy. So you're covering that kind of thing. You're also trying to, there's a massive push for gender equality. And all these conversations are being done without actually attaching themselves to what you would call broad socialism. So that's kind of encouraging that people are trying to the people are saying we don't need a pure socialist ideology to pursue these libertarian reparations. So I think that's good, you know.
Yeah, I think it maybe is now coming more down to just humans. Do you know what I mean? Just let humans be humans and not critical about the way people are behaving, looking, or doing. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's also kind of like it's talking about what you would call politics are attaching themselves to what you would call personal freedoms rather than how the state structures wealth, I suppose, you know. And so that argument between free market economy and public ownership is not there at the moment. People are very much focusing on what you would call personal liberties.
Yeah. What was your starting point? Because you, Victor Jara, we discussed. Patrick Jones is an old friend of yours.
Yeah, Patrick Jones is he's the older brother of Nicky, who is obviously my songwriting partner in the Manics, and I've known Nick since I was 5 years old, and Pat is like 4 or 5 years older, and I've known Pat as his older brother. And Pat was a bit of an inspiration to us because Pat went away to America and did his degree in America, and he introduced us to lots of stuff like Lawrence Ferlinghetti, Jack Kerouac, Allen Ginsberg, Walt Whitman, kind of like lots of the beat writers, basically. And so when we were teenagers, when we were 15, and when we were writing books, writing music and trying to be in a band, he introduced a lot of other extra literature to us, which gave us more of a sense of, I suppose, how poetic things could be, you know. So yeah, he's always been an important person in the background to us. And he's somebody that I still see on a regular basis, and he shows me all the things that he's writing. And he would show me a series of writings that he was kind of doing on Victor Jara, on his life. And the writing took the form of prose, poems, even a one-man little kind of play. And I asked him eventually, I said, what are you going to do with this? And he said, oh, I'm not going to publish it. I'm not going to try and publish this like I usually do with my poems. He said, I'm just kind of doing this because I'm enjoying it. It's a writing exercise. Yeah. And I always find that interesting. The writers sometimes just write because they enjoy writing. They're not always writing to be published, you know. And I love that. But I said to him, can I just take this stuff and see if I can fashion it into a record? Number one, I don't like the idea of these things not seeing the light of day. And number two, I think this could be a great record. And I think he was kind of shocked at that. But he let me take this stuff away, and I started doing it. And it became clear very quickly that it was going to work. You know,
it's a one poem that really struck you when you first went through his through his words.
Yeah, that's a good question. I've been asked that before. I'm trying to think what the lyric was that really made me realize that I could turn this into believable songs, because you know, the journey from poems or prose to a song is quite a long one in a sense. I think it was The Boy From The Plantation, I think. Okay. Because the rhythm, for rock and roll lyrics to work, they have to have that sense of rhythm naturally to fit into a song. You can't just force words into a song unless you're Bob Dylan. Bob Dylan can do that, but I can't. I'm not good enough to do that. And I think once I realized that something as simple as his name could be a chorus, Victor Lidio Jara Martinez, once I realized I could turn that into music, I realized that there was a musical connection to be made, you know. And I saw the lines in that song, you know, in the cadence of the wind, its throat in your strings, you know. I love that line, you know, the concept, because the lyric is about his origins, his peasant origins, and him connecting to music through his mother's guitar. He learns how to play on his mother's guitar. And I loved the symbolism of the song where his mother had stopped playing because she had to work so hard, and he picked the guitar up and he suddenly connected with music through his mother's guitar. And I just love the idea of that, just pure, simple symbolism, you know.
And there was the song that really the poem that really learned you. Well, maybe I can work this into a song. What did you stumble upon when you wrote the album? So, meaning the life story, or maybe the prose. What struck you?
I think two things that became really apparent. Because I knew the story. I knew how brutal the ending of the story was. I knew how oppositional the political scene was. So I knew all those things. But the things that I kind of discovered was I didn't know so much about Victor Jara's music. I knew about the symbolism of what he stood for. I knew about his beginning. I knew about his ending. I knew about the middle even. I knew about his connection to the Hollande government and how much work he did for them and how famous he was. I knew what he looked like. I had a sense of him, but I didn't really understand. Sorry.
Yeah, no problem.
I'm an idiot. I didn't have a sense of how gentle his music was. Like when you think of protest singing, you think of something which is very confrontational, or you think of something which raises its fist into the air. His form of protest singing was inherently beautiful. Dare I say it, feminine. Dare I say it, kind of like just overly poetic and romantic. And I was impressed that he was trying to connect to everybody. He was a man that believed in an ideology, and he definitely believed in a broad leftist way of thinking, where he believed in things for the people and for a collective spirit. But he wasn't saying it exclusively to one person. He was trying to sing it to everybody. And he wasn't trying to condemn any part of the population, or he wasn't trying to ostracize any part of the population. He was saying, please, let's be together. And he was almost pleading to them. And some songs are like prayers. They're not shouting. They're not preaching. Some of the songs are like prayers. So I was very impressed at how somebody could be in the face of sometimes brutality. He was faced with brutal opposition. Sometimes he was faced with the threat of violence, but he always sang with a sense of beauty and there's always a sense of poeticism to his music. So I was very impressed at how he could achieve that. I don't think many people have achieved that kind of beauty and kind of like inclusivity with the protest music. Usually they're very... And so I discovered that. And the other thing I discovered was there were so many people in his story that made him, that contributed to the person he became. So obviously the obvious person is his mother. His mother is massively important. And then somebody called Violeta Parra, who was a folklorist in Chile. She was a singer-songwriter. She was an artist. In a broad sense of the word, she painted, she wove, she sang songs. And she went into the Chilean outback and she found all the lost Chilean songs and recorded them in her head. She didn't even record them on a tape recorder. She went and recorded all the songs that were going to be lost from the Chilean outback, and she recorded them and made sure that Chilean music stayed alive. And she was a massive heroine to kind of Victor Jara. She was a very big influence on him. And then his wife, this is a song on the album about Joan Jara, his wife, who was a massive part in his life. So I suppose really the other part of his narrative, apart from the tragedy and the inspiration, is the fact that these three women were such a massive part of teaching him about life, really.
And if you connected the three women and you say the feminine side of his music, is it a coincidence?
Again, I haven't made that connection, really. No, probably not. You're probably right. Actually, that's why you're a journalist and I'm not.
Oh. Is there one song by him that you say, well, this is something that really in those lines, in those words, you can really it really shows how he writes, how he connects.
Yeah. I think there's three songs that stand out. There's one song called Manifesto, which is like a prayer for what Chile is, like a prayer for what Chile can become. So when if you hear the title of a song and it's called Manifesto, you would imagine that thumper. Do you understand that? Yeah. You would imagine it's just like people going and raising their fists aloft. It's not. It's like a prayer for what Chile can become. It's a prayer for the ambitions of the people, every person that lives in Chile. It's almost a prayer for everything that is inside Chile and his aspirations for it. That song is amazing. It's another song called Preguntas por Puerto Montt, which is about it was about a small massacres, I suppose, of people that were living on some wasteland in Puerto Montt, and they were killed by the authorities. Again, you would expect this song to be very, very angry and oppressive. And it does have some anger to it, but it still has a sense of lyricism to it, and it still flies. And then there was another song called, God, I'm really trying my Spanish is going to sound so bad. Te recuerdo, Amanda, which is just a song about somebody walking into the factory and thinking about their life. It's a beautiful little sketch. It's just gorgeous. I think if you take those three songs, Preguntas por Puerto Montt, Te recuerdo, Amanda, and Manifesto, you see that how he wove pure beauty into political thought, into philosophical thought, into reportage. He still managed to make it beautiful somehow.
Is it for you because you said, well, the Boy from the Plantation was the starting point? Are there other key songs for you on the album that?
Yeah, for me there was something called "There Will Come a War," which was one of the first songs. I think the lyric was written from the point of view of the people being ready in Chile in 1970, 71, 72. They were ready to face the forces against them with some kind of hope. But I took a different angle. For me, it was interesting to see how Pat thought, what Pat wanted the song to be and what I wanted it to be. And I wanted the song to show the fear that the people had, that the Hollande government was going to be overthrown by the right wing. I wanted to show fear in the song. So that was a song where there was a tension between what I thought the song was and what Pat knew it was. And it was a nice little junction. There was a tension between our intentions. And I like that. I think it made for something good.
And how did you solve it?
Went my way.
That's cool. And the other key songs?
I think there's an instrumental on there called "Under the Mimosa Tree." Mm-hmm. For me, which is if you're trying to portray who somebody is, and you leave out their family life, if you leave out the what you would call the simple domestic acts of just living with your family. If you don't portray that, then you're missing out on a massive part of what somebody is. And when I was going through the file of stuff that Pat had, sometimes there were just titles and there were no words. And I just asked his permission to just use the titles. And I'd say, "Oh, what is this about?" And he said, "Well, I wanted to write a lyric about, Victor's domestic life, his relationship with his children and his wife, and with just his home. The relationship you have with how much you love the favorite seat in your house is so important sometimes, And I said, that's enough. I don't need any lyrics. I just want the title, and I want to try and portray that moment of when people retreat into their lives and they're having just lunch or dinner or breakfast with their family underneath a tree in their garden, if they're lucky enough to have a garden with a tree in it. Then I want to try and portray that. As simple as that. I love the idea of just doing something simple like that.
And what was it like for you? Because you said Patrick was 5 years older. He was an inspiration when it comes to literature. What was it like for you to actually work together with him now?
Kind of similar to Nick, because obviously Nick's been my best friend and I've known him all my life. And I always kind of try and make it clear that it's always been an education for me to write music to their words, whether it be Nick or Richie. When Nick and Richie used to write together, I would have a sense of pride that I understood most of what they were on about, but inevitably, sometimes I would have to say, please fucking explain this to me, you know, and that's the educational side. And that happened a lot, you know, so it was the same with Pat. Sometimes I'd have to ask for, sometimes you don't want to know what everything is about. You want to interpret it yourself. But sometimes asking him what the pure simple facts were that his references were, was enjoyable, because you learn more when you ask people, obviously. But also I love the fact that I remember when I had my first lyric off Nick when I was 15 years old. I remember that it was almost like when text when text kind of rises off the screen in a film, like a special effect, you know, I would just see the lines that I loved, you know, they would just rise above the other words. And I had that with Nick and Richie's lyrics when they used to give them to me. Lines would just float from the page and above the other lines, and you go, wow, I love that line, and you'd be inspired by a line. Yeah. And it was the same with Pat's writing. Some of the lines would just rise up, and you just go, wow, if I just write the song just because of that line, I want to write it.
Is there one line that you say, well, that really inspired me to a whole song?
Yeah, kind of. There are many lines. I love the couplets in a song called Requeda, because they managed to weave the politics of Wales in with some of the belief systems that were happening in Chile. So you take an historical fact and making it quite poetical, which I always think is the hardest job. Kind of like, but again, one of the lines from the Boy from the Plantation, like, you know, in the cadence of the wind, its throat in your strings. Already, you know, in those just two lines, you know, Pat is summing up the kind of the wild beauty of Chile, which is, you know, kind of like, you know, especially Chilean Patagonia. I've only ever been to Patagonia in Argentina, but if Chilean Patagonia is anything like that, then it's amazing. And I love the way that he's summing up the beauty, the inherent beauty of Chile, and the slight wildness of it. And he's kind of like, and he's anthropomorphizing kind of like the wind into an instrument, and he's fusing kind of Victor and his mother's blood together all in two lines. Yeah. I think that's amazing. I think, you know, to actually take the kind of the feel of a country, the geography, its psychogeography, the mother, the bloodline, and the symbolism of the music together in two lines is such an achievement, I think.
Is for you, do you think that your own musical standards are raised by good lyrics?
Hopefully that's the story of my life. Hopefully.
Yeah, and is it something that because, well, you said you wrote music to lyrics by Nicky and Richard, and now to Patrick. And you said, well, you learn from it. What did you learn actually from the lines, from certain lines from this album? Stuff that you didn't know.
Yeah, no. I think it was actually, this is a song called The Requeda, which is so Requeda is obviously Spanish for remember, and it links together how we have felt in Wales about certain things to how kind of like, you know, somebody in another part of the world in a different hemisphere can feel as if that they are fighting against an injustice. And Pat did this because he had reminded me that there is a Victor Jara festival in Wales in a place called Machynlleth, which is in North Wales. Machynlleth is a really important place in Wales. And there's a festival dedicated to Victor Jara there, one of the only ones in the world. And that serendipity is quite interesting. And just up the road, 30 miles or so from Machynlleth, is Lake Tryweryn, which was a village, a Welsh-speaking village in Wales that was flooded and destroyed to provide water for England. And it's still a very bitter memory in Wales where, you know, a whole, you know, a small village, but all the same, a whole village and a very ancient village and a very old village and a very important Welsh-speaking community was destroyed for water for England. And it's still a very, very bitter point of political tension in Wales. And the fact that the Victor Jara Festival is just 30 miles down the road just doesn't seem like an accident. The fact that Victor Jara was written about by somebody called David Ewan, who's a Welsh folk songwriter as well. And obviously David Ewan, kind of knows about Lake Tryweryn, obviously the way it was flooded for water in England. What I'm trying to say is there's an intersection of people protesting about sometimes how they're treated by a centralized government and how their voices are not heard. And I like the way that Pat in the song Recuerda has joined these two disparate geographical places together in one verse. So the first, second and third verses in Recuerda, for me, are quite an achievement, I think. Sorry, that's a long answer. Sorry.
No. It's really interesting. Do you think that what is the sentiment in Wales towards the English?
Oh God, kind of like a lot of us. I think it's just most people feel. A lot of people feel British. They just wish that their Welshness was respected more. That's all.
Okay.
And they wish that we have a Senedd, which is a government in Wales. A devolved government which takes some decisions on our behalf. So power has devolved away from London to a certain degree. We get to make some of our own decisions, but not all of them. I think if our parliament can exponentially grow and we can get better at governing if we can become better at governing ourselves, then our parliament, our devolved parliament, will thrive. Until we can actually do a better job ourselves, we'll stay like this. If you look into the past, there's lots in our history that we can be bitter about and we could be in conflict about. I'd rather not get too conflicted about that, because you can't blame generations that are here now about what generations did in the past. I don't really want to go down that road, especially in this day and age. But I think, there's, Boris Johnson, our Prime Minister, just announced a package of measures to try and kickstart the economy in Britain, and not a penny of it was for us. So kind of, decisions like that still really fuck us off, and, they will lead to bitterness. So kind of like, when Boris Johnson talks of Britain, but secretly he's excluding us, then that doesn't lead to good feeling.
Yeah. How come do you think the sentiment is still around?
I think when a government is centralized, there's always a possibility that a population in other parts of that country will become disenfranchised, or they'll become disillusioned because they'll feel they're forgotten. Yeah. And I suppose there's a resentment that in Wales that we were good for the Industrial Revolution. There was so much coal and steel that came from our country, and as soon as the natural resources were expended in this country and they were taken, then we were fucking forgotten about. So, that suspicion is still there, I suppose, really.
Yeah. And last question about this, you said that just be a little bit more respected. And can you name me, for example, one thing that could lift the Welsh hearts against the English? What would they do? Could they do?
Well, number one, it's not against. I'm not against. I'm not against being British. I'm not against the Scottish, English, or Irish. I am British, but I do identify myself as Welsh, perhaps a bit more so than being British. No, there's nothing. I think it's when I think in that way, I only ever think of sport. So it's football and rugby, really.
No, that's good. I also read that have the recordings been started for a new Manic Street Preachers album?
Yeah, we've started demoing, we've started writing, and we don't really know the shape it's taken yet. As simple as that. This is a funny time. We haven't spent time in the studio with each other for 6 months. So until we actually come together and play new songs together. Like we've got demos that I've played on my own because they're just sketches. But until we get together and actually start playing together again, we don't really know where the direction is going. But we've got some songs with which we have a lot of hope for. But until I think it's getting closer now, where we might be able to actually meet in the studio and play these songs and see where the direction is taking us.
Yeah,
we're off to a good start.
That's good. And so obviously maybe next year.
Hopefully, but who knows at the moment? Who knows, you know?
Yeah, it's true. Well, the album, last question about the album. The album is called Even in Exile. When during the writing of this album did you come up with this album title?
It's just one of the lines in Boy From The Plantation. I was interested for the fact that kind of Victor is somebody that quite a lot of people know about, but nobody really knows any of his songs. Like, you know, there's lots of other protest singers where people can connect to that person and their history by knowing at least one of their songs. People don't really, a lot of people in what you would call in the mainstream don't know much about Victor. And obviously we were just looking at how much his influence is still so ever present in Chilean culture, especially in as a political inspiration to people in Chile. And I was thinking, wow, you know, his influence has gotten even stronger, even much more so after his death. And like, you know, and my knowledge of him has grown even more rich and greater since his death, even though I live in a different hemisphere. And it's almost as if that kind of like that his story has become much stronger since he has died, that people know about him more, people take more inspiration from him, and they actually view his music, the fans of his view his music now with much more clarity. And it feels as if all that has been done in exile. So there was one line in the song Boy From The Plantation. There's a line in there where his mother is talking to him in a removed state, because obviously there is one of them is dead by then in the narration of the song. But it says even in exile, and we just took the line from the song because it seemed like he's more important now since his death than he was when he was alive, really. So it seemed fitting.
What does his life story tell you about the influence of music?
Just tells me that if you do something beautiful and if you do something with a pure intention, you do something with every part of a truthful heart, then it can endure. And I'm not saying he did that all the time. I'm not saying he was a saint. I'm not saying he was a martyr. I'm just saying that he really tried so hard to actually try and convey a sense of pride and a sense of humanity in what to be a Chilean was, that it's endured in his music, definitely.
Yeah. And how do you think and if so, how will this album will influence your new work with Street Preachers?
I don't think so. I kind of like it. I'm looking forward to going back to Manic Street Preachers now. And this is an experience that I've loved, but perhaps I'll get to play double bass on a track. I don't know. Okay.
That's true. Okay, well, thank you for your time.
Cheers, man. Same to you. Thanks.
And I think the album will be released in August, right?
August 14th. Okay.
Yeah, and do you think you will do anything more with the album, or no touring? No
gigs. No. I've got to get back. I've got to get back on the horse with Manics. Anything. If I went on the road with this, well, also number one, there's no concerts anyway at the moment, and number two, it would get in the way of my day job. You know what I mean?
Well, looking forward to your day job then.
Cheers, man. Thanks a lot.
Thanks
for some challenging questions. Take care.
Bye.